Welcome to episode 64 of Anchored in Education. I'm E. Scott England, and Anchored in Education is the podcast dedicated to all things education. Educators across the world routinely engage in conversations surrounding fundamentals, concepts, and new ideas that improve this great profession. Sometimes we agree, other times we disagree. But at the end of the day, we are all anchored in education. Last week began an amazing conversation with Joe Fatheree, co-author of the ASCD book Adventures in Teacher Leadership. Joe was the 2007 Illinois Teacher of the Year, and clearly he demonstrates why. On top of that, he has won multiple awards for filmmaking as well. Last week, we just scratched the surface of what teacher leadership can look like in schools. As Joe will tell you, we need more great teacher leaders now more than ever. I hope you are as excited to continue this conversation as I am. Joe, welcome back to Anchored in Education.
Well, thanks for having me back. I really enjoyed our last conversation on teacher leadership and look forward to delving a little bit farther today.
Absolutely. Now, we had an amazing conversation during the first episode on Adventures in Teacher Leadership. So today, we're not going to cover anything from episode 1, but we are going to encourage everyone to check out that first episode so they can get the complete picture. Today, we're going to begin the conversation by talking about something that has been discussed a lot on Anchored in Education. Of course, I'm talking professional development. Now, I love the quote on page 66 on how year after year, well-intentioned PD, quote, bore teachers to death with soul-sucking sit-and-get talkathons, end quote. Let's spend a few minutes talking about voice, choice, and agency when it comes to professional development.
So, and Scott, you've been on this end of it where
Yeah.
you sat through some of these sessions and you're like, oh my heavens.
How does this apply to me?
Yes, and how I'm going to take about and then from your side now and the administrative side, one of the biggest challenges you have is how do you provide meaningful professional development for staff members? And there's a lot of money that's been dumped into really poor professional learning. So it's both sides of the coin. And, one of the things that I think that our districts are blessed with is you have a lot of great PD in your district, people who can share best practice. And, we're very blessed in Effingham Unit 40 to have some incredible teachers. And so one of the things we did a few years ago was we're blessed to have a great performance center in Effingham, the Effingham Performance Center. And I had worked with some of the leaders at TED Talks, if you're familiar with them, with my work at Enstoy.
Yeah.
And we hosted an event at our national conference where our teachers did TEDx style talks talking around core topics. And we brought that back to Effingham and we did our own version of TED Talks where we had the EPC gave us their facility. And for 2 hours, we had teachers talk about an array of different topics in short TED style talks.
Wow.
It was incredible to listen to these teachers tell their stories from a teacher who taught special ed, who was disabled herself, who had hearing loss. I was almost in tears, literally, when she finished her story, to when we finished our session where our kindergarten teachers got up and talked about best practice, and they brought out an array of kindergartners on stage to be able to share. It was our teachers giving back and sharing. Well, that didn't happen easily because, in the business community, you get applauded for as you move up and as you speak out and as you get, awarded, different accolades and things like that. The teaching community is not like that. And it's kind of a crab in a bucket syndrome where, a lot of times the more that you're noticed and the more you're awarded or the more you're in the paper, the more you're pulled back into the bucket.
Yeah.
And so in our teacher leadership training in Effingham, one of the things I was very proud of our teachers about was they said one of the first things they want to take on was professional jealousy. And, we really worked really hard on helping our teachers feel good about self so that they could feel good about others. But to go back to the piece on this was, I think one of the things that you could do is really look at your teachers and how can they share. They have so many different skill sets, a lot of them that people just are not aware of, that they can share across the board. Now, that doesn't mean that there isn't value in bringing other people in from the outside, because you do get a fresh perspective on things. But, really getting teachers talking instead of teachers just sitting and listening. And so that's one of the things that, we're going to do here. We're going to start our first ed camp at the end of the school year. We're going to have our teachers who are going through teacher leadership training, the third round of it. They're going to experience their first ed camp, and some of them will be their very first time. And this is teachers sharing some of the knowledge that they feel, the most confident in. And I don't know if you've been to one of those, but that's a
Yes.
great way for teachers in your district to be able to share best practice and to learn, and also then be able to encourage teachers to say, hey, there's this great teacher in another district, or there's this great person for you to follow on Twitter, that they bring their resources in, and you get this crowdsourcing of information together, so that they can actually reach out and they can stretch their networks to be able to grow professionally that way.
Yes, we have actually started kind of taking that shift in professional development in our district, because that's what I think schools need to realize, the amount of talent right there within your walls. And that's not saying that you can't bring in an informational piece, but a lot of times we overlook some of the smartest and most innovative people, and they're teaching right next door to us. So
Well, and I think with that, Scott, too, I think that if you do that, I think that conversation needs to be had across the district about, we want to hear from all of you. Today, we're going to hear from this group, and that you talk to the group that's going to present about, it's great that they share, because there may be some reluctancy to do that if your district has never, attempted that type of
Absolutely.
learning. I think the other thing that's happened is in professional learning, that a lot of times it's just one and done. And so a lot of districts, Sean McComb, a former national teacher of the year, out on the East Coast, he does a lot of learning walks. And he will come by with a group of teachers, and they'll say, okay, I want to learn about this. How do they work on discipline in the classroom? Or how do they get students engaged and talk? Or how do you work with, this certain subset in your school that you're having a hard time figuring out how to reach them? And he would go out and gather that information and say, okay, I'm going to take teachers A, B, and C with me, and we're going to go see these different teachers and look at how, and they're very short segments where they might just be in there for 5 or 10 minutes. And then they walk out, they have a debrief, and they go on. But there's a lot of different ways to extend the tail of professional learning, where when, in the past, what it is, you have, a speaker come up, he or she gives an hour talk, and you see 40 slides, and then you go back and it's up to you to interpret how to use it. And to be honest about it, in the day-to-day walk of teachers, their life is so busy, that stuff tends to get put on the back burner unless it becomes it's a blaring need that they have to get to. Well, if you can do some of these other additional pieces, and especially if you have teacher leaders in your building that are saying, let's go back and talk about this as a staff meeting, and maybe the administrative leader can sit down with the teacher leaders and say, what did you guys get out of this? How can we extend the tail of it so the conversation grows? That's a way to use those teacher leaders, to be able to help extend those best practices across your building, because the administrator, he or she's never going to have enough time to be able to get into those classrooms. And likewise, it's one thing to hear it from your administrator. It's another thing to hear it from your peer who's in the same trenches with you doing that type of work.
Sure. All right, so let's shift again. Now we're going to have the data conversation, and we've talked about this on Anchored in Education before, but you rightfully point out that the term data has been given a bad rap in education. So let's throw in another word that you mentioned from this chapter, and that's research. So two important words that often gather eye rolls or sighs, I suppose. And so these are the building blocks to a better teacher, better learning, and better schools. So, can you share some insights for us?
Well, and I'm going to tell you, so when Rebecca and I sat down and decided how we were going to take the book on, we divide the chapters up, and I don't know if I got assigned or sentenced the chapter on data, but I'm not going to tell you I was just thrilled about taking this one on because I knew it was going to be a hard write.
Yeah,
Because most teachers, what we look at is data. It's the stuff that shows up in the newspaper that shows how poor your district's doing,
that's right.
or it shows up on your evaluations like, okay, and a lot of times in the past, evaluations were not used, at least teachers didn't feel like it. They were used to grow you professionally. It was like, okay, here's what you're doing wrong. And so, but that doesn't have to be the case. Data doesn't have to be a negative word. And what it can be used for is to really look at best practice. Where am I doing a really strong job at? What are my weaknesses? And I have them just like everybody else. And what can I do now as an interventionist to figure out what's the best practice for moving forward on this? And as you tie the research piece in, and a lot of our teachers have, I guess, they've looked at research probably for most of them. The last time was either in grad school as an undergrad when you were supposed to write a term paper on stuff. But it's not like in Finland where you're trained as a researcher
Right.
to be able to develop a hypothesis about maybe why your students are struggling in this core concept, and then sitting down with your teammates and saying, okay, we're really having an issue with our students getting this math concept, and so how do we get our hands around it? And that was one of the teachers we talked about in the book, Danielle Massey, who was with the Department of Defense, and she was overseas, and they were struggling reaching a group of, her students or black male students in her classroom, and they were constantly falling through the loopholes, and she couldn't figure out why. And she and a teammate took this on, and they started figuring out it was their instruction and they needed to change the curriculum around to meet the needs of those students. And she taught in, of course, being with the Department of Defense, they had kids that were high mobility rate. And, a lot of times when they were moving, the parents then were deployed, and you had all of the stress for those things going on. And they found out, those kids needed, more SEL mental health work along the way to help meet the needs of the kids. But it was because they were willing to look at the data and say, okay, we have a subgroup here that's really struggling with things, and we can't keep passing those kids on. We have to own this. And, it was hard for them to accept that in the beginning, but because they were brave and they were courageous and they figured out a pathway, they grew a program that involved other teachers in it, many other teachers, and those kids all found success. And, and the other part of that was those teachers found success. They weren't tired anymore, and they realized that even though that they were part of the issue, they were part of the solution now, and the behavior problems, reduced. And so everybody won because they were able to take those pieces and make them better for those kids. And so and I've talked to a lot of people about it, and Derek Olson, who was a former Minnesota Teacher of the Year, he was at his state legislature, and they were getting ready to pass a bill on the evaluation process, and he had completed his whole doctoral thesis on this process with that tool. And he's sitting there listening to it, and he said everything this guy is talking about is wrong. And so he went back and talked to the people, invited him up there, and they said, well, would you like to testify in front of the committee today? And he goes, I absolutely would. And so he called up, the people who developed this evaluation tool, and he came out, and because he had the courage, he understood data, he understood research, he was able to stop what was going to turn out to be a really bad bill getting passed through the state legislature and really change teaching for the better that day. And so it doesn't have to be a negative thing. And Derek talks about, if you're really into the qualitative side, then do that type of data. And if you're into the quantitative side, then do that type of data. There's room for people who are the storytellers and grab the anecdotal stories, and there's room for the people who do the number crunching side. And the people who can do both, they're able to really create this masterpiece of art and take data and apply it back to the art of teaching. But I know for a lot of teachers, they're going to hear this and they're going to be like, Joe, I don't have the time to do these things. But I also want them to think about the times they've been frustrated, and let's say they have gone to an administrator and they're like, he or she never listens to my problem. And I'm like, one of the very first questions I ask now is, well, did you just go dump a problem at your administrator's door? Or did you research the problem and come with, well, here's why it is a problem from my perspective. Here are the things I'm going to leave you with. And here's a possible solution based off of the evidence that we've uncovered. I think a principal is much more likely to listen to that than
Absolutely.
they are just a list of problems, because they don't know if you're complaining or if you're just coming, and really looking to work with them to create a solution for stuff. And when I talk to teachers about that, they're almost all of them look at it and say, you know what? That's exactly who I've been in the past. I've come and I've dumped this stuff at my administrator's feet, and I've asked them to solve this issue, not realizing they've had 100 other issues dumped at their feet that day with no real clear pathway. And now they're overwhelmed just as much as I am. And so what we do is we try to teach them how to go find that data and how to develop that research and how to make actionable solutions out of those things. But that again comes back to, I think, maybe administrators sitting down with their teacher leaders and saying, I really do want to hear from you. I'm being very honest about this, but here's what I need to hear. And here's the format I need to hear it in, so that we can sit down together. And if you don't have these skills, then let's figure out how we get that training together to do that, because I've always assumed in the past everybody has them. And this is not an insult that you don't have them, because I didn't have them either. And, once we get those lines of transparency, kind of worked away a little bit where it's clear and they understand everybody's on the same page, I think typically you see a lot of great work happening that way.
All right, and that rolls right into the final chapter, including it couldn't have had a better story than your story about Derek in Minnesota and going before the legislators with his research and data to help get something not passed, but then the right thing put in place, and we're of course now we're talking advocacy. So I'll just be honest here. This is one thing that I undervalued whenever I got into the profession. And I now, of course, realize how important it really is. But it's not an overnight thing. So, can you elaborate more on advocacy, including how it is, quote, a marathon and not a sprint?
Well, so I think in the past, advocacy for teachers has been left to the union, and that we usually feel that that's the role to be able, that's the organization to advocate for teacher rights. And I totally I believe there is a place for union to be able to talk about labor and have all of those conversations. And so but I also believe that teachers need to individually be involved in the advocacy process. And it doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to Capitol Hill. I think a lot of people look at it that way, with a picket sign and you're protesting and doing things. And there may be a place to do that, but there are clear lines of advocacy for teachers to be advocating for their students. It may be at a team meeting where a student is struggling with being able to read or being able to work through mathematics, and they may need services, and you may need to have that research and data piece where you're bringing it to the team to advocate for the rights of that student. You may need to advocate for a different curricular area. Maybe you need new curriculum in your school, or you need new training for things, and so going to your administrator or your department chair and advocating for those pieces. It may be advocating in your community for the community to come on board to help with things. Like, I'm going down to speak in Florida in 3 weeks, talking to teacher leaders about how to advocate for school safety. There are a lot of conversations, and I understand. My goodness, you talk about something that's scary and no one knows how to get their hand around. You talk about school shootings, that's it. I mean,
Yeah.
nobody knows how to talk about this subject. And I had a teacher leader talk to me the other day. She said, well, Joe, so what happens if there is an active shooter in my building and my autistic kids will not be quiet? Never thought about that before, Scott.
Sure.
So she needs to go advocate for her administration. How are they going to handle this as a building? She also said, so what happens if I have uh, non-English speaking students in my class and we all of a sudden have a crisis and we need to move? How have we developed a communication channel for those students? And I thought, again, never thought of this in my
It's
life.
a good
So
question.
she needs to go advocate. And so we put together a lengthy document for teachers and administrators to work through this process. Well, if you never talk to your principal, you never talk to your superintendent. If you have a hiding place in your classroom, well, has that hiding place been approved by your administrator? You know, so if your administrator hasn't thought of those things and he or she can't think of everything, having that advocacy there is a big deal. Being able then to go advocate for a bigger deal. So like right now, there's a conversation going on in Illinois about getting rid of Ed TPA for pre-service teachers. Well, is that the right thing to do? Are teachers involved in that conversation? I understand we want to create a clear pathway that encourages young adults to consider teaching as a viable career. But we also don't want to lose the professionalism of what teaching is. So there's a real conversation that needs to take place there. And the lawmakers who are considering this, you know what? They want the best for our kids just like everybody else. I talked in the book about, our lawmakers, the ones I know are not writing laws to spite teachers and kids.
Yes.
They really have the best interest of our kids there. And every one of them that I have talked to date, I walk away thinking about, you know what, just like me, they want the best for our kids. They want the best for our teachers. But because they don't really have a clear pathway into classrooms, it's difficult for them to understand that. So they have, a lot of different things to consider. So invite them to your classroom. A lot, especially at the state level, a lot of your state reps, a lot of your state senators, they're more than willing to come there. Invite your school board members in. We just had an innovation day in my classroom 2 weeks ago where we had the Secretary of Innovation from the governor's office in my classroom, but we also had two board members. We had community members in there. They get to see what's happening. And it wasn't myself and my co-teacher talking all the time. It was the kids talking. The best advocates are my kids. They get to talk and they get to share, and we teach them how to talk to adults and do things. But that's one of the things that teacher leaders can start looking at, and invite the principals and administration in, invite other department members into your school. Now I am going to say, if you've never done that before, it's going to be a scary proposition and people are not going to know how to take you
Right.
because you're inviting them. And that's why we say it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. In most cases, advocacy it doesn't happen in a 2-hour span. You're building relationships. You're helping people understand what real teaching and learning looks like. You're also learning from them what making laws are like, whether it's the school board level and you're developing policy there, or it's on the Hill or meeting with the President of the United States. Each and every one of us has our own piece in developing policy. I know for when I was working with Instoy, one of the things I was fascinated by, we talked to congressional leaders. They said, you know what, on any given month, on certain bills, unless it's like a real hot topic, he said, we might get 20 or 30 phone calls. And that's from a congressional leader.
Wow.
And I'm thinking, you know what? And then how can they be informed?
Yeah.
And so it's our role as teachers. I had somebody stop in my room the other day and heard about this Ed TPA thing. And I said, all right, here are some people that you should consider calling. And she picked up the phone and she's going to call them and just say, you know what, I want you to hear my position as a teacher leader. And as you get farther up, the policy chain, and most likely here in Illinois, you're going to get a chance to talk, especially in our area, to your state rep or your state
Yeah.
senator. Your mayor's going to be very excited, or county board members are going to love to hear from you. School board members are going to love to hear from you. But when you call Congress, don't be surprised that your senator or your congressman doesn't pick up the phone. There are just too many other things going on. So, and I was, when I first started, I was naive on this. I didn't know any better. I was insulted. I'm like, well, I'm a voter. I ought to be listened to.
Right.
And what I found out was they wanted to hear me, but I need to talk to their aide. And if, it became the aide would filter the information back to them. And there has been times where I have had the opportunity to go talk to them. But one of the best ways has been for me is to reach out to my local or my congressional leaders, and I invite them to my classroom on a regular basis. And they do come through the area, and they do stop by, and they do like to hear from the kids, and they do like to hear from you. So I would like, people again who are listening to this, that advocacy is an essential tool for communicating to the leadership around the world about what great teaching and learning is. And my piece on this is, if you're not telling the story, somebody else is.
Absolutely.
And if you don't believe me, look on Facebook, because you'll find it right there.
Yeah. And, I liken that to, if you're going to take up mountain climbing, Everest is not going to be the first mountain that you attempt. And so, so advocacy is a lot of the same way. I mean, you may be driven to reach out to, your U.S. congressman or the White House, but I mean, start local. Start with your own school board. Start with your local elected officials. And what I have found that whenever I begin getting into advocacy as an educator is that my state legislator, my state senator, they're very accessible, and I may talk to their aide, but then they'll call me up. I had one call me not all that long ago and said, I appreciate the email that you sent. This is good information for me. I didn't know about it. And I mean, it truly is that simple. And they're appreciative whenever they hear from educators. Because like you said, unless they came from an education setting, they don't have a whole lot of experience or knowledge in what they're going to be voting on. They need us to help them.
Well, absolutely. And I'd say the other piece of this is, I would encourage people, before you go at whatever level, do your due diligence and make sure that what you think is going on, and that you've talked to other people and look, because it gets really easy to get frustrated, with all of the stuff that's going on in education, and come from just this perspective. But if you're going to be an advocate, one of the things you need to really do is try to look from everyone's different vantage point and see where they're coming at it from, and to answer those questions. I was at a meeting several years ago where there were a group of teachers that were really frustrated, and they were going to Congress, and they would have had congressional leaders' ears, and they started talking about what they were going to advocate for. And I said, well, before you do this, you might really sit down and take another look, because I said, what you're advocating for is No Child Left Behind 2. And I just want to make sure that before you go do this, that you're willing to put your name on that, because these points right here, I'm not sure that you've checked these out, because here's what the research would say on this. And they did go and they did check, and they came back like, wow, that's exactly why. So sometimes, what I like to do is I like to take a breath, put stuff away a little bit, take a step back, go talk to some people that I really trust that are going to push me back and say, have you thought of these things? And that really makes me, when I go, that I've made sure that I know as much as I can. And also don't go trying to point a finger and blame someone. Rarely does that ever work.
Right.
Go with open arms and say, you know what? I would like to be a part of the conversation. I know you have a very difficult job. Here's a perspective that I'm not sure that you've had. I've offered to share this type of information with you. And even people who you may not be on the same page with will respect that perspective. If you walk in pointing fingers and you're automatically put them on the defensive, they're going to be just like us. They're going to, the walls are going to go up, and very rarely is positive work going to come out of that. So a calm head and mind usually works much better than one that comes, with trying to have an agenda pointed at somebody.
Absolutely. Solid piece of advice there. Hey, before we go, Joe, at your school district in Effingham, Illinois, there is a teacher leadership program, and you've sort of hinted around at this, so we're gonna get to it because we're hoping you will share more about this, so now listeners can see what is possible in their districts.
So real quickly, yes, I'm very fortunate that I have a superintendent, Mark Doan, who just gets this. and he understands that for his district to be successful and meet the needs of the kids, and that's what he always comes down to, is does the work we're doing meet the needs of our kids? And do our teachers have the tools they need to teach in a manner to do that type of work? And our school board has also bought into this, and so they support it. So we had several years ago, about 4 years ago, we brought together Catherine Bassett. We brought her out here. She shared from a national perspective what teacher leadership is and really helped our teachers understand that concept. From there, we brought together several key stakeholders, excuse me, building administrators, um, administrators from the district office, and teachers, and we had them go through several different rounds of training. We based it off of the U.S. Department of Ed has a they have Teach to Lead summits, and they also have Powered by Teach to Lead. And I would tell anybody in Illinois, our state does this every year. And if you're looking to get something off the ground, apply to our Powered by Teach to Lead summit.
Okay.
And we had our teachers go through this, and we had them do logic models on what they wanted teacher leadership to look like in our district. And we just filtered through those. And then the final piece was we sent a team of teachers and administrators to Bloomington, Illinois, where one of the Powered by Teach to Leads was at. They developed a 3 to 5 year plan on what our teacher leadership program should look like. We made collaboration our fundamental framework piece. And the next year, we brought in our first cohort, and they were nominated by teachers or by administrators. And typically it was people who were already involved in a lot of committee work or had, they were looking at different programs, and they had a lot of work on their plate, but they might not have ever been given the right tools to do that work. And so we went through that round of training, focusing on collaboration, but honestly looking at self. Where are you as a teacher? What tools do you need to be successful? And how do we help you grow your collaboration skills so that you can start advocating across, the building, grade level, district, wherever you needed to do that? Then we took them to Teacher Leadership 2 the next year, where it worked on building networks and how you would build networks in your building throughout the community, nationally, internationally. What did that look like? And then we brought in our next cohort into Teacher Leader Model 1 training, the first level. And then the next year we brought in, and that would be where we're at right now, is we have our third cohort. So they are actually now, they've moved on to personalized professional learning. So what needs do they have to grow their practice so that then they can share that out across the networks they've built over the last 2 years? And then the next piece will be deeper in instruction. And so we just rotate these teachers through. They go through like our level ones will have 3 training sessions throughout the year. And those are day-long trainings. And we space those out so that they get a lot thrown at them. And we make sure that they have time to digest that information. We're also asking them not to take on anything new. This is just awareness, and it's growing them. And like in level 2 training, one of the things, I just did this 2 weeks ago, one of the training sessions is on personal care of staff.
Very important.
Very important. It's one of the last things that gets looked at in school. And all of our teachers, I think nationwide, are overachievers and they're perfectionists. And the last people they take care of, they're selfless.
Yep.
And the last people they take care of is themselves. And so we at the district level want them to know you are important to us. And so how do we work on that? And so the next 2 levels, the level 2 and level 3, we've broken those down into half-day trainings. We meet one day in the summer, and our teachers get compensated for that. So they're paid for their time. And what we've built is about half of our district has now been trained. And out of that,
wow.
And Mark Doan will tell you it's the best professional learning money he's ever spent as a superintendent. And what are getting out of this is now we have like in Southside Elementary School, how the teachers work with parents the first day of school. Totally have retrofitted that because it was a teacher's idea. And what was sparsely attended by parents in the beginning, I think the first year, that's the number I have on the top of my head. The first year they had like 98% parent participation. We've grown new curricular areas. We've had ways that now started in second grade with the second grade teachers. They just weren't happy with the way their department meetings were running. And now, so they built a model that has spread all over the district with the way teachers now run their department meetings. We have teachers that are working across building levels and grade levels because for the first time they've actually been able to work together in these teacher leader training pieces. And what we're doing now is my co-teacher in this, Julie Flack, and myself, we are now scheduling time with everyone who's gone through the teacher leadership training, and it's not one and done training, but we are going to meet with them individually to figure where they're at, how we can help grow them, how we can help support them. Maybe things we're seeing, it's happening at the fifth grade level. Maybe there'd be a good partnership at the high school level. And we have a hydroponics program that has grown out of this, again, that's spread across our district because teacher leaders have learned to work together. So we're still in our infancy, I think, and the fourth year of the program, but it's paid huge dividends to the district, and it's just fascinating to me to watch these teacher leaders grow and speak and share and develop programs well beyond the walls of Effingham Unit 40 now. Some of them have taken them out and spoken at large conferences and things like that. And we've had different districts come in and see. We've had key stakeholders from around the state come in and talk to our teacher leaders, and they all walk away, really just impressed with where the teachers are coming from. That not us selling it, but from the teachers who are actually in the program.
Sure thing. And this is something that any school, any district could implement and achieve. And I think the best way to get started is by picking up a copy of Adventures in Teacher Leadership, and I'm going to put a link to the book and how to get it on my website. Joe, this has been a informative 2 episodes talking about teacher leadership. Thank you again for taking the time and joining us.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm appreciative of all those listeners out there that are contemplating teacher leadership, whether it's administrative level and how you can foster it across your district or building, or those teacher leaders that are taking that first step, and just really excited to see where your journey takes you at.
Yet again, a wonderful conversation with award-winning author, teacher, and filmmaker Joe Fatheree. Now, you can read more about Joe on my website, escottengland.com, and of course, I'm going to link to that book we've been talking about for 2 episodes now in the resource section. You can find Joe on Twitter, search @JosephFatheree. Now, before I wrap up today's episode, don't forget to subscribe to Anchored in Education on whatever platform you get your podcasts. And if you could share it with your network on whatever social media you use, that would be appreciated as well. Now, Joe said early on in the book that his teacher leadership was born out of necessity, as in something had to give in how he proceeded with education, or he had to find a new career. He is also quick to point out that maybe teacher leadership is not for everyone, but I believe that we are too quick to determine if it is or isn't for us. It takes confidence to be a leader of any kind. This can sometimes be difficult when you are newer to the profession. At times, it may seem like so many are stacked against you. I remember early in my teaching career, I was marching the halls with my students. We were having fun, and I'm sure I was dressed up as someone or something. I've talked about this before, I know. But it was part of our learning. A veteran teacher walked by and said, loud enough for me to hear, "Anything to get more people to look at you." It hurt. I wanted to say, "Look behind me and tell me how many of my 20-some first graders look unhappy." But I found out that is just going to happen, especially when you begin making an impact on others, not just students, but when other teachers begin looking to you. That is hard for some veterans to accept, but that just means you are taking on the role of teacher leadership seriously. And don't let it stop, because you're making a difference, you're making an impact, and most importantly, you're keeping firmly anchored in education.